We are still recovering from the joy of Hiroki Goto's IWGP World Heavyweight title win, but we got a week off to contemplate it, with New Japan throwing in an NJPW Cup bracket to occupy us. So we're going to look at that with some interesting matchups looming ahead. We'll also take a look at Fantasticamania coming up. That began just yesterday, and we'll continue on, and we'll be seeing some of it next week. And then we'll look back at the life of Gran Hamada. So plenty to talk about this week. So with Jeremy Finestone, I'm Stephen Conway. This is Speaking of Strong Style. Welcome, everyone, to Speaking of Strong Style, where we discuss the news, issues, and events surrounding New Japan Pro Wrestling. As I mentioned, he's Jeremy Finestone. I'm Stephen Conway. It has been a little bit over a week since the big New Beginning event, which saw a new World Heavyweight Champion crowned. I'm still in the afterglow. I'm still loving this whole new Goto world that we're in, Jeremy. I'm just very happy. I'm very happy for the guy. I think this is just a terrific thing that New Japan has done, given us one of the feel-good moments of the year. And we're coming up on the anniversary show where he'll have his first defense against Hiroshi Tanahashi. And it's been fun going back over. I watched that match a couple of times now and just enjoyed the heck out of seeing him have that moment. How have you been feeling this week?
Our homeboy Goto got his victory lap in life, doesn't it feel like?
Yeah, a little bit.
They talk about, like, earning it or deserving it or everyone getting a turn or anything like that. And there are people a lot from the outside looking in that kind of look at it like that. But that dude has been grinding so hard for the last 4 or 5 years, just unceremoniously. And I was telling one of my friends, JD, this is the guy, like all the other big stars, even though Naito's washed and he's still there, Goto's the last of the old guard that can really go and can really be the flag bearer of everything that has come before in New Japan.
Yeah.
And the fans knew that. And they were just, this is our guy. He bleeds the cerulean blue. And I was just happy for them. That crowd they wanted it. It was like Eddie Guerrero, the Cow Palace. It was Bryan Danielson against Swerve Strickland. It was all those big moments. Cody at Mania. That was a big deal moment. And you don't get those opportunities a whole often. And they capitalized.
And for the people that feel like it's his turn or whatever, and that it's not something that they should have done, I will just counter that with saying being the last guy from the old guard will mean something when he passes it on to the next person. It's part of the story that he is the last gasp of that old group. That is, and when the title moves away from him, it will be that title truly moving away from that era of New Japan Pro Wrestling and into something very new. And I'm looking forward to it. I don't think that belt is with him for a long time. So I hope
we're here for a good time, aren't we?
It's not going to be a very long reign. I'm almost sure of it. It'll be longer than March 6th. I don't think he's going to lose it to Tanahashi, but it's a transitional thing. Just like Zack and Goto are not there to have their own dominant eras the way Naito could have if he were healthier, the way Okada did. But what we're looking at here is a way to christen a new group of main eventers, and he can absolutely be a major part of doing that.
Yeah. He's the right guy at the right time to hold this belt. And that's how I feel about it. Zack Sabre Jr., he was the right guy at the right time through the Tokyo Dome.
Yeah.
But when Goto won that Rambo and we started seeing the reactions in New Year Dash and the Road 2 shows, you couldn't deny this guy's momentum. And, you got to have faith with the wrestling company sometimes that they're not going to jerk you around. They're not going to yank your chain. They're going to give you what you want when it's time. And they gave you what you wanted when it was time.
And we're going to see, like I mentioned, the transition, but more than that, Zack Sabre Jr., he won the G1. He won the world title. He main
Tonight
event
to the Tokyo Dome,
and won both of them. So from here on out, if he wasn't a made man before, and I think he kind of was, he certainly is now. You can put him in any of those positions again: a G1 final, a world title match, a Tokyo Dome main event, and no one's going to blink. They have established him as someone who can handle any of those spots on the card. And it's someone who is unlikely to be leaving. He hasn't shown much interest in coming over to North America with any regularity. He seems to be a New Japan guy. And that's also been healthy for the company. He accomplished his mission, which is make him a main event level opponent you can slide into just about any spot when necessary, and that's a wonderful thing to have.
Did you see Zack Sabre Jr. is wrestling in the States on like March 1st and March 2nd? GCW against Mance Warner.
Yeah, go figure. That an interesting matchup.
It just feels like, okay, I had to do this job. Now I'm going to take it easy for a while. Just kind of like check off some boxes with some matches I've been meaning to do. Never could do this match while he was the champion, the IWGP champion. So I'm glad that, his cachet has gone up a bit. He probably can command a little bit more money from other people now that he has the stature of being like an IWGP champion. And, the familiarity and the recognition among the fans, like, he is in a class all among himself, among contemporary wrestlers, and I stand by that.
Well, we'll see how he does in this New Japan Cup coming up. That's the next thing. So it's been an interesting time this week. I've been watching a lot of with no shows to watch on NJPW World at all, and there won't be until next Thursday either. I've had time to catch up on some of the other promotions out there. I've been watching Noah. They're in their junior tag league. I've seen some of that, and Kenta is back over there teaming with Keno. Keno has amicably parted ways. There's something we don't see very often in wrestling. Amicably parted ways with Kiyomiya. There's a Kitamiya and a Kiyomiya, and I keep doing that. But Kiyomiya, they shook hands and just said we're going to go our own directions there. As
you meant Masa Kitamiya and Kaito Kiyomiya, right?
Kaito Kiyomiya, yeah. Kiyomiya and Keno have shaken hands and said we're not going to be part of the same faction so much anymore. I think Keno's going to go more with Kenta, but it's.
I just wanted to casually flex my Noah knowledge right there.
Yeah. So interesting things going on there that involve former New Japan talent. And then going over to, I watched some Marty Gold today. I watched some Stardom, checked out a little bit of TJPW. So yeah, I've been able to sample other stuff in this time off. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
You know what I did?
What'd you do?
Watched almost no wrestling that I didn't have to.
Oh, really?
Played a bunch of video games, hung out with my wife. Really took advantage of the time away from wrestling to just kind of come in fresh and just kind of have batteries recharge. It's rare that like we can have a show and just have no shows to talk about. Most of the time we gotta like watch 4, 5 shows in a week to just kind of make sure we're on top of everything. I'm loving this right now. It's not going to last forever, but I feel like I'm on spring break for pro wrestling.
Yeah, a little bit. Looking back, they're doing less on NJPW World with lately so far in 2025, and what we would get in past years, especially with Fantasticamania, sometimes shows without any commentary at all, Japanese or otherwise, but just the camera up there, and they would at least show it to us. And this year, they're not doing any of that. We're not seeing any of the house shows leading up to the Korakuen Hall shows next Thursday and Friday. That's the next time there'll be live action on NJPW World. So, but there are other things going on. As you can say, I'm wearing my Austin FC shirt. The season opens on Saturday. Soccer season, Major League.
There's that
soccer
U.S.
season.
versus Canada hockey game that's apparently tonight that everyone is losing their minds for.
I am fired up about that. And then
I knew nothing about this until somebody at work told me about this. And I was like, how many fights in the first minute?
3 brawls in the first minute of the last game between these two teams.
That's amazing.
And then we had, today was the very first spring training game for the Cubs and the Dodgers. Cubs and the Dodgers are starting their seasons a little bit earlier. They are leading off Major League Baseball season in the Tokyo Dome in March. So they also are starting their spring training games a little earlier because of that. So just watched a little bit of that today. So I
remember Craig Counsell saying he pretty much has no choice. He's got to start Seiya. Who does he have in in Chicago that plays for Japan?
Well, Shota Imanaga is our pitcher, and then Seiya Suzuki is an outfielder, designated hitter.
Got it. I was about to say Seiya Suzuki was the picture, I'm like, immediately in my mind, I'm like, that's not right. And I'm like, I'm going to Steven on this one.
Shota Umino is going to be the one. Yeah, and of course then they'll have Otani and Roki Sasaki, and so it'll be a big deal over there in Japan. They're already fired up about it. I had some people ask me about it when I was there for Wrestle Kingdom when they found out I was a baseball fan. They were, especially a Cub fan, like, oh, they're coming here, and then they start talking about Otani, which is all anyone talks about in Japan. It seems is Otani.
I wasn't going to, but I may end up going to Vegas for Mania weekend.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I was thinking about that. I'm hoping maybe there's some shows there. I know the Dragon Gate show on that Friday night is something that I want to check out and see the talent there, but maybe we'll get
a lot of Joshi around too. Marigold, Stardom,
just depends on when I get there and I leave. It kind of became a thing that I decided to do this week. Just talking to people, it's like, I guess I could go. And so
when's AEW coming to Dallas? When is that one?
That is after Dominion, like middle of June, maybe July.
They're coming to the baseball stadium, right? Where the Rangers play.
Yeah. That's where they're going. That's their big show. I wouldn't be shocked if that's where Will Ospreay wins the title if it's not at Double or Nothing in Glendale, Arizona.
Glendale, Arizona for Double or Nothing, not the MGM Grand Garden Arena.
I think they ceded the ground of wrestling in April, May this year to WWE. I think it's going to be hard to follow up on that and get a lot of people.
Yeah, and that could be a bad look. That could be a bad look if that show doesn't draw well when they do Mania in the football stadium. So it's probably a smart move to do that. So,
but that Collision show ended up being pretty good with the Okada and the Ospreay and the Omega matches and all that stuff. It's like the crowd loved it. I know the We Work Stiff guys ended up going to the show and had a good time with it. So it's not New Japan. AEW will never be New Japan Pro Wrestling, but at least these brands are finally going around the world and doing these things. I'll tell you what, though, this 18 by 18 controversy about the size of the ring versus. Did you hear about this?
Tell me more.
AEW got shit because for whatever reason, shipping a ring that's 20 by 20 ended up being very problematic for them to get to Australia. So when they got to Australia and tried to get a ring, everyone made 18 by 18 rings. So their ring was 18 by 18. I was watching the show. To be honest with you, I didn't notice. I didn't care. Like, everyone was going faster and everyone, like, the moves just were going off quicker because there was less room in the ring. It was great.
18 by 18 is not unusual for a ring size at all. Not unusual ring size.
It's
but I do know that
common in a lot of places. But these big shows, these big promotions, they have bigger rings for television purposes.
Yeah.
Is what it is. I think they got it from Robbie Eagles, actually. I think the ring ended up getting it through from Robbie Eagles, and he made it happen. So I don't know, man. This is the pro wrestling world. It filmed great. I don't care.
That's the problem not too many people have is that you don't think about it until it's almost too late to deal with it. But like, why wouldn't we be able to ship the ring? Then someone says, well, we can't ship this. You're like, oh crap, we don't have a ring. It's got to be a little bit of a scary moment.
Absolutely. Like what happened with the Elimination Chamber with WWE a couple years when they were doing it. Like they had the pirate issue and they're like, they had to go a completely different route. And you're just like, guys,
I forgot about that.
World, it gets in the way of your fantasy.
Can you imagine if pirates had actually captured the Elimination Chamber? It would be like the greatest.
And then they're using the Elimination Chamber for some weird war game, like in that.
Well, I was just thinking, they would give it to their kids, right? They'd have the best playgrounds, war set ever, Thunderdome set. Everybody had the toy rings as a kid.
Well, we have the actual than my outcome.
The actual Elimination Chamber. I'll go figure. So War Heroes asked a question. Colin is here. Colin, glad to see you here. Don't worry about being late. It's not a problem. He said, what shows I'm assuming the question is, what do you watch besides New Japan? I have been buried in Japanese wrestling lately.
Can I ask him to follow up? Are you asking wrestling shows or just shows?
But for wrestling anyway, I watch just about as much Japanese stuff as I can. Stardom is my first priority. I stick with Bushiroad. Stardom is my first priority after New Japan. I also watch Marigold, Noah, and I
Mhm.
want to watch more All Japan. And I think I'm going to get the All Japan streaming service once the Champion Carnival comes around in April, which is their G1 tournament. I really like what I've seen from All Japan. I watch a little bit of Sendai Girls, TJPW. DDT doesn't really do it for me, but so All Japan, Noah, New Japan, and I don't get to, and Lucha Libre when I can. I like watching the Friday night Arena Mexico shows from EMLL, and I don't get to see a whole lot of North American wrestling. But one of the things about, well, North American being U.S. and Canada, pardon me, Mexico is North American, but I get recaps very easily of all of the WWE and AEW stuff, so I follow it. I don't sit down and watch the shows until you get to the major events like a pay-per-view, and those I do watch. So there you go.
I will watch passively for the most part the live airings of Raw and SmackDown on TV. It'll be on, and I'll pause here or there when I need to, but like I'm just picking up like the main bits of everything if it's going on, and I'll stop if I like a good match or like something about it is catching my eye or like an angle or something like that. But I do not like commit actively all of my attention on those shows until I'm watching the PLEs or the pay-per-views. They're content churners at this point. You know, like they're filling content rather than responsible product at all times. And that's fine, but that's how I look at it. It's time to fill programming. They have a contractually obligated like amount of time that they have to air content with these wrestling programs, and it's not always the greatest stuff. So like in my mind, I prioritize like how much I'm going to pay attention to certain angles and certain things going on the TV. And when it comes to the other shows, yeah.
I also follow old stuff a lot. I watch old stuff a lot. And, you know, because of Peacock, they have archives back from the territory days, which is when I fell in love with wrestling. So I started watching those. YouTube has a lot of it too. What's funny is I figured out that what World Class, Mid-Atlantic, and Mid-South Wrestling and WWF's old Madison Square Garden shows are all there from about 1982 and 1983, 81, all that. And what I'll do is I will watch all the shows from that same time period in a row. So like on one day I'll watch Mid-Atlantic, and then I'll watch the Mid-South from that same week in 1982, and then I'll watch World Class from that same week in 1982.
Oh, so you're tracking what's going on in real time.
Like almost, in quote unquote real time.
Almost as if you were tracking the Observer at the same time. And
yes.
Like, yeah, you're.
And that's what Ringside Replay kind of does, where I do that for all the territories.
You follow the timelines.
Yeah, I follow the timeline week by week, and I do enjoy watching those shows. It's fun to see the guys because back then you would see a show and you wouldn't necessarily see any other territories. They would all be on local TV channels, you know, around, and you wouldn't know. And sometimes you would see a guy on one channel a week after he gets beaten, run out of town on one channel, and then he shows up on the next week's TV and always in a new territory. It's this new fresh guy. And, you know, like when you're watching it live there, you just don't see, when you were watching it in that time period, you wouldn't necessarily know that until later when you would read it in a magazine that, oh, this guy just went down to Memphis. This guy went to Texas. He's not in our area anymore, but here I can watch all that happen. It's kind of
I listened to Brian and Vinny show, and on Tuesdays they recap Mid-South Wrestling right now, and
so good.
It just sounds insane, you know. It just sounds like golden age of wrestling. That's just like, it's almost outlawish at the time, but like now it's just entertaining.
It's crazy. That was a great show back in that era, and all of them had their runs. You know, I'm working my way up to Starrcade '84, Thanksgiving of 1984 on Mid-Atlantic, and that's been interesting seeing Dusty booking, taking over the book in Mid-Atlantic and bringing in his guys. A lot of Florida guys coming through. You would just see things happen here. If you don't mind indulging a digression, but
no, go for it.
All these things you would see they started pushing Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo hard on Mid-Atlantic television in like September and October. All right. Having coming in, winning every single week, every single TV show. Barry was doing what they eventually did with Magnum TA, which is he would win in less than a minute. You know, he'd beat a squash guy and these great young talent. And I'm sitting there watching this and thinking, I know that Wyndham and Rotundo are the WWF tag team champions like 3 months from this time. You know, I know that because they were at Mania, they lost.
So you're waiting for the pin to drop, right?
Yeah. And then it's funny because just 1 week, no one mentions them at all anymore. They're just poof gone. No talk. And that's when Vince was starting to pluck guys.
It's no Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows where they're talked about every week, even after.
Yeah, and Junkyard Dog. Just all of a sudden, Junkyard just ain't in Mid-South anymore. Right. And all of a sudden, Bill Watts is saying things like, "Oh, Butch Reed was just too much for JYD after all the years. He couldn't take it anymore." And it's because he's on WWF TV and things. And you would see things like a guy finishing up in a big feud, going into steel cage matches in Mid-Atlantic, and that he's finishing up because you start to see him winning squash matches as the new guy in WWF. So he was going up and making WWF TV tapings 2 days a month, and then going back to the Mid-Atlantic territory and losing his stipulation matches on the way out. But meanwhile, his squash matches building him up for WWF. So when he's done in Mid-Atlantic, he goes right into a high position in WWF. It's fascinating to watch these machinations happen, especially with hindsight, when you know how it's going to turn out.
You know how the sausage is being made.
Yeah. So I enjoy the hell out of that. And I know we're babbling here, but that is...
the thing about wrestling, and, I'll digress a little bit too, is like, I love wrestling. I love the theatricality. Yeah. I love the uniqueness of the fact that you have athleticism, a storytelling mechanism, and the theatricality and the pomp and just the pageantry to really dress it up as something completely unique. And I've always wanted to know more. I've always wanted, a peek behind the curtain. And like everything else in life, the minute I got a peek behind the curtain of how that sausage is made, I kind of loved it a little less. It's just kind of like, oh man, some of these guys are real piece of shit.
Well, is that true? Boy, when
and you're just like, it was another one of those, these are human beings, don't treat them like demigods, don't treat them like larger than life heroes, because they will disappoint you. And it is rare that they don't. It is rare that and this is in all walks of life. Do not put people on pedestals that can accomplish great athletic feats or anything like that. And so, now that I've kind of had that peek behind the curtain, it really changed how I look at a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And I think I'm better for it because I think I can look at it a lot more objectively rather than subjective as a fan.
I never had the Santa Claus moment in that by the time I started watching wrestling when I was 8 years old.
Right.
But for somehow a reason, and I don't know how, I don't remember how,
mechanism this is all bullshit in a way.
No, I knew that it wasn't real before I ever watched it. And I don't remember who told me that or how I knew that. I have no memory of that whatsoever.
You just walked in on it and you're like, I know it's not real, but I still like it.
Well, yes. And I'm sitting there watching this stuff, and it was Georgia Championship Wrestling. The show might have been World Championship Wrestling, but it was still Georgia at the time. And it was on TBS, and it was still just the Georgia territory. I think they called it World Championship Wrestling by then because it was nationwide on the satellite. But it was still just Georgia. That was, and sometimes they'd stray up into Ohio, but it was just that area that I was watching. And I thought, okay, so if this isn't a sport, if they're not competing, what are they doing here? Yeah. And that's when I started watching, okay, so that guy's cheating, and the fans are upset, and they're doing this because, and I just started putting together things like, okay, he's new, so he's going to win because they're going to want me to think he's a threat. I just kind of I was intuitive toward that stuff. I just sort of realized what was going on. Anytime someone new came in, they were going to look good, at least at first. And then I started putting together like, oh, he's doing that to get that rise out of the crowd. And then once the crowd comes up, that's when the good guy is going to come back. And I just started putting that stuff together really young. And it was because I wasn't looking at it like I was watching a real sport, the way some of the other people my age were looking at it, who weren't thinking about it and thought maybe what they're watching is real, but that something's a little bit off about it, because I knew I was watching a show, I started to look for those seams and just like, well, what are they trying to tell me by doing this on TV? When this happens, what are they trying to say to me?
Right.
And the other thing I found out, this is kind of a kick. It took me a long time before I decided on a favorite wrestler. And my first favorite wrestler was Dynamite Kid when he got to the WWF. He was part of the British Bulldogs. And for some reason, I had watched it for years at this point, a couple of years. And I just said, okay, that guy is my favorite, right?
Okay.
Later on, I started to realize something that Dusty Rhodes was my favorite, and he was feuding with Ric Flair over the title. Then I really liked Magnum TA, and he was challenging Ric Flair for the title. And then after that, I really liked this guy who was wrestling Ric Flair for the title. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. They're not my favorite. Ric Flair's my favorite. And they're like, wait a second. Now it's hitting that like anyone that was wrestling the Midnight Express was my favorite tag team. No, the Midnight Express are my favorite tag team. And that's kind of when, you start to put things together as
the thing that they started clicking. You're like, oh, this is got it. Yeah.
Oh, I see what they're doing.
I got into wrestling because it was adjacent to comic books, and they had the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling cartoon. And I was trying to track that cartoon, like trying to find it and watch it rather than actually watching it. Yeah. And it was like a young FOMO thing. And from there, I watched a ton of WWE and, the Superstar show on the weekend, the hour-long show and whatever.
Yeah.
Frankly speaking, like as a kid, you were like, there's a right and a wrong way, and there's a winner and a loser, and how come they can never like these refs are so bad, and they're always compromising, and there's always like a workaround to actually there should just be a winner and a loser. It's a game, or like it's a fight, or it's about. And this is my logic as a kid. And then as I get older, I'm like, oh yeah, the world is all about compromises. This is a lot more about reality of how things are done. And then it's very, very difficult to just objectively name somebody a winner because people are awful. I get it now.
Yeah. The other thing that was funny to me is when the WWF first started airing in my hometown, South Bend, Indiana, and all that. Or the first time I became aware of it anyway. I remember just thinking it was wild that they had a good guy as the champion.
Right.
Like, whoa, that kind of blew my mind because so much I had been watching so much of Georgia's style, which was the money's in the chase, right? You put the belt on the heel and make the baby faces chase it all over the place and try to run them down. That Southern style wrestling is kind of built on that. And then what I did not see was that superhero babyface style that WWF used, where it was just a succession of guys, Bruno Sammartino, Pedro Morales, Bob Backlund. Bob Backlund was the All-American guy. Pedro Morales was there to appeal to the Hispanics and Puerto Ricans in New York. Again, the immigrant population was in love with Bruno, especially the Italians, of course, but other immigrant groups as well. And they had Ivan Putski for the huge Polish population. They ticked all those boxes, but they had superheroes, and that that blew my mind. That like, wait a minute, you mean it's the other way around? It's a succession of bad guys challenging these guys and getting turned back instead of some dominant champion. Always your guy would come within a hair's breadth of winning the title and lose, or he would win it and then lose it to a different bad guy close because all that money was in that build up and that hope that this guy was going to do it. And it was a totally different philosophy. So I was fascinated by the contrast between WWF and Georgia, and I saw some World Class back then because it got on a syndicated show that if the weather was right, you could get it in South Bend. And just that whole idea of, the bad guys just seem to always be just out of reach, where in the WWF, it was like this hero on a pedestal, like a comic book guy come to life. It was fascinating to me.
what WWF and WWE do very, very well, and what I like to see in other promotions when they do it well. And this is top program stuff with the top belt, but it cycles. You have heels and faces win, and every so often the timing is right for the big first time babyface run to win the title, the Quest. Where like they have to go through the Campbell like obstacles and really like prove themselves, and then they hold the title for a run. Like they become the main character, like Cody Rhodes now. Like he quested for the title. Now everybody's coming for him, and everybody's got their shot. They're all taking a crack at the champion, and nobody can quite take him down. The main character, babyface. That's where they're going with like Will Ospreay and AEW, and I'm waiting to see who that main character babyface is going to be in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I feel like the New Japan Cup, which we should start talking about, might shed some light on that.
Well, thanks to everybody who indulged us there as we kind of went down memory lane a little bit. A couple of comments that are worth making.
I thought that was pretty good.
That was terrific. Colin says we should give Marvelous a go. They've been putting on awesome shows and have 2 awesome rookies. Okay, well, Marvelous. I'll try to get that. War Hero's asking, who is Momo choosing? She's broken my heart too many times. What's that now?
She chose Mercedes on Dynamite last night.
Oh, Momo? Who are you talking about?
Momo Watanabe had the title challenge.
Yes.
And he was asking who was Momo choosing.
Okay.
She chose Mercedes last night on AEW Dynamite.
Understood. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Momo's broken my heart too many times. I'll never believe in Momo fully. Let's see. What else here? Barry and Mike Rotundo just vanished back then. Yeah, they just went again. That was when Vince was getting guys and they weren't doing jobs on the way out. They would just leave a territory suddenly. Happened all the time. And then War Hero's asking, do I watch Defiant or WCPW? No, I'm not familiar with those. I would be curious
to see. Pro Wrestling?
I think so. Yeah, I would be interested to see it if I
think West Coast Pro Wrestling is the one that Chris Hero books, and it's near me, but I have not been able to make it out to a show. I work very early on Saturday and Sunday morning, so me making plans on a Friday night has to involve my wife, and
yeah.
And she's not going to West Coast Pro Show on a Friday night. That's not happening.
No, I suppose not. All right, New Japan Cup. They dropped the brackets on us here just a day or two after Goto's victory. And I have to say that as we look at these, there are some very interesting matchups, a couple of which we are actually guaranteed in the first round. We're going to see them. And then the usual Goto thing where he is teasing us with a bunch more for the second round, some of which we'll get, and some of which we will not. And so
I fantasy booked the whole thing in my head already.
Yeah, of course. And of course, the first thing that leaps out at me is after Evil has unilaterally kicked the War Dogs out of Bullet Club, or so he says, there is a possible meeting between Evil and David Finlay in the second round if Evil gets by Yota Tsuji. That one jumped out at me. Another one, and this one screams Goto yanking the rug out from under us. Ryohei Oiwa, possible second round matchup with Zack Sabre Jr., but he has to wrestle Chase Owens in the first round. That feels like a Goto special where we think we're getting a second round match for sure, and then we don't. Another one.
And the whole 3-8 night of Ryohei Oiwa and Chase Owens and Gabe Kidd and Ren Narita, like, fuckery abounding on that night.
No doubt about it. And then, Gabe Kidd and Ren Narita, we will absolutely see in the first round. That is a first round matchup. And boy, I don't like Gabe Kidd's chances in that one.
I don't like Gabe Kidd and I don't like Yota Tsuji. And I think there needs to be a little bit of parity after both guys had that draw that they both lose their next match. I think there's something to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then on the other side, we have Great-O-Khan facing El Phantasmo. Now, El Phantasmo, of course, the television champion, so you can build a challenger for him off of that. He also has an open challenge on the 6th at the anniversary show. El Phantasmo. Not really at the moment. I haven't really thought about it all that much, to be honest with you, though. My mind's been on other stuff. But Great-O-Khan and El Phantasmo are facing each other in the first round. The winner of that one gets Shota Umino. So we will not see the new Shota until the 12th in the second round. Okan is the guy that kind of made him into whatever the heck he is now. We'll find out. Is he the one that, or do we get that match then? Another one, Jeremy, I know this one jumped out at you. Callum Newman, Tetsuya Naito in the first round, after all the history between those two, with Jeff Cobb waiting in the wings. We also have Tomohiro Ishii and Drew Maloney. Ishii and Maloney on the other side, with TJP getting the winner. And then Shingo Takagi with the bye, getting the winner of Bolton Oleg and Bad Luck Fale. So I feel pretty good about
hilarious.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, what constitutes a bye in this thing?
I thought it was doing well in the cup the previous year, but I'm confused about that now. I have to go back and look at the results, but I thought that's what it was.
Look, Taichi just, Taichi just seems like he's been placed there because it's really convenient to put Taichi there.
Let me look up the results from last year's cup. But okay.
Did Shota Umino and El Phantasmo face off last year at all?
Gosh. See, you're asking these questions. I can't look them up at the moment.
All right. You look that up, and I'm going to talk about some of these brackets.
Yeah, please do. Because there are some really interesting things going on here.
So we got the Yota Tsuji, EVIL, and David Finlay thing. It makes a lot of sense for EVIL to get the upper hand on Yota Tsuji real early in an inconsequential non-title match before they were potentially face off at the Cup Finals or Sakura Genesis in the beginning of April before we go to the Windy City Riot. Because we are now doing the whole big New Japan show, and then a week later is the U.S. domestic follow-up for that. So we're running that route. So it's kind of possible that we have a New Japan IWGP Championship coming out of Sakura Genesis going into Windy City, because that title has been said it will be defended at both Windy City and at Resurgence in May, but they did not mention who the title, what the title matches would be, or who potentially the champion would be, whether it would be Tanahashi or Goto based off of the outcome of that match.
Yeah,
so presuming there's another match set up between now and then.
That's a good point. Yeah, it does. Clearly, kayfabe reasons they don't want to say anything in that direction.
Right.
Also, I look back on the 2024 New Japan Cup tournament, and none of these buys make a lick of sense, really.
I thought so.
Moving on. I mean, a couple of them do. Shingo does. Finlay got hurt, but he was on his way to having a big tournament. But yeah, Taichi lost in the first round, gets a bye this year. Who the hell knows?
There are some matchups here that seem like they should do rather than fan servicing. I think getting EVIL and David Finlay is kind of important. I think eventually getting Yuya Uemura and David Finlay at some point, whether it's in this tournament or later on, is going to happen this year. So I kind of see David Finlay and Yuya Uemura kind of leading the charge on that way. Frankly speaking, I think Ren Narita comes out of the bottom left corner. I think he and Ren Narita and David Finlay end up being the final two on that side. There's absolutely no reason for Zack Sabre Jr. to be going any further than somebody like Ren Narita taking him out. And I think they want you to want Taichi versus Zack Sabre Jr. and then Ren Narita takes that away from you.
Well, okay. What they want us to have is what they're teasing us with is Zack and Oiwa, but I don't think
we get past that.
I don't think we're going to get that. And then, but the other part of that is, I think Zack could come out of that bracket, and I actually think EVIL is coming out of the top half of it, just on what I'm looking at here, because they are going to want to put over EVIL strong with this push to take over Bullet Club. I don't think they're going to want him to lose. I think he beats Finlay in the tournament, and it's going to be
something between EVIL and Ren, man. That's the thing. If Ren were to go farther than EVIL right now, that could cause some problems.
But I don't think that's the story they're telling right now. I think House of Torture is going to be unified. The other thing that's interesting to me about that, I don't think you do Uemura and Finlay yet, because at least for this feud with House of Torture and the War Dogs are going to be the unquestioned baby faces in this.
Right.
So it's confusing the issue a little bit to put Uemura in against a guy who is going to look like a fresh babyface, and Finlay can still be the current War Dog David Finlay, the intense mean, except they're going to be baby faces for a while. It doesn't have to be forever, because we know how this stuff works, but at the beginning of this, when House of Torture is lying, cheating, stealing, ganging up on, knocking out referees, and piling into the ring on Gabe Kidd in particular, and
so
Finlay and all these, they're going to be the absolute baby faces. So maybe don't do other things with people you want to be a baby face. So Finlay and Uemura is probably a bad idea in this cup because it would actually divide the crowd a little bit, and you want everyone solidly behind Uemura when that match happens.
Okay. So I am presuming a heel wins this tournament to face Goto, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
probably
it could be Evil.
Could be.
I think it would be a mistake to have Evil win this tournament in a lot of ways. I think his positioning is a little bit different than that right now. So in my mind, when we had the angle at New Beginning where Ren Narita took it upon himself to attack and then Evil showed up, there was that little bit of a moment where Evil kind of took control of the situation from Ren, who had it under control. And so I don't know if that is news or noise in terms of the general tone and tenor of House of Torture. So when I'm looking at this, and I think Evil and Yota Tsuji could have a program together for the global title, I'm thinking David Finlay might be having something going on with Ren Narita instead, because on that side, well, frankly speaking, if your final four, in my mind, should be 3 Japanese individuals and maybe 1 Gaijin, one foreigner, because the talent is already so steady in the whole program that you don't need to rely on Zack Sabre Jr. and David Finlay to hold up one side of the bracket. You know what I mean? And Evil with Yota Tsuji already kind of feels like that global title is kind of tied up. So if David Finlay is going to come out of that top bracket after maybe going against Yoshihashi, but we had Yoshihashi and David Finlay as a match, 3 or 4 months ago.
I just don't see him getting past Evil with the
So
story.
Evil and Yuya Uemura, I feel like you save that in a little bit of way. That's a down the line match, whereas you've already kind of introduced the Evil David Finlay dynamic. So that was the whole thing, is are we really at a New Beginning where they're really putting an emphasis on these young guys? You got Yota Tsuji finally has the global title. Ren Narita has the never openweight 6-man titles, but he can threaten through an immense sort of way. And it then kind of plays back into, you've got a babyface and a heel dynamic between the two going on to that cup finale. And then once that's done, it can be about going for the title. And then Finlay can pivot back to that. It feels messy, but I do think that Finlay is a strong one. Evil is the dark horse 100%, but in every way, shape, or form, I feel like Ren Narita is the guy coming out of that bottom bracket.
Yeah, and I still think it's Zack. I think they're going to. I think Zack is going to go pretty deep and have a run and make him a mountain that somebody else has to climb to get there. That's just my first instinct. I might change my mind before this tournament starts, but yeah.
What is the history between Zack Sabre Jr. and Ren Narita?
What if it's what now?
What is their history?
Yeah, there's not a lot.
New Japan TV title final.
Yeah,
and they had a Wrestle Kingdom matchup the year later.
Yeah, and my thought on that though is, Zack can be the guy that overcomes and TMDK can help him overcome the House of Torture interference for one night. Whereas I think it's very important that Evil gets over with this. More important than Narita right now.
There is a youth movement, and I am just very curious about how much of a youth movement they are going to put on Ren Narita as the number 2 to House of Torture, and how long that is going to last. Because there's obviously movement with Evil within the faction.
But if you beat Evil in the second round, then it just does. It kind of pisses all over what the angle they just ran.
Not necessarily. if it was Ren Narita that started the whole charge against like the guys in the first place, and then Evil came out afterwards, like it wasn't Evil that was making these declarations. Evil went after like Yota Tsuji first and then kicked those guys out, but it was Ren Narita that instigated all of it. And that was the part of it that to me,
have we heard
like,
that?
He was the one that came out. Like he was the one that did all this, and then Evil came out.
But the whole thing was the whole thing was a setup for the Evil's back moment.
I don't know. Like I'm just
all right. I think this is about Evil. I just think
they staged it in such a way where I have a question about who's actually in charge, and that was
all right.
Yeah. Oh, let's talk about the other side.
Yeah, the other side a little bit different in that there isn't the heavy storyline going on except for Shota Umino. So Shota Umino and what we get whenever he shows up on the 12th to face the winner of Phantasmo and Great-O-Khan is going to be very interesting. The rest of it, we have the Jeff Cobb, Callum Newman, Tetsuya Naito. That could go a lot of different ways. I don't know if the company is ready for Newman to beat Naito there, but someone's going to have to face Cobb. The other one, Drilla Maloney and Ishii with TJP waiting for them. But the one that we have Chase Owens on one side, Bad Luck Fale on the other. Where is the Rogue Army in all this? We're going to get a little bit of an indication there. I have a feeling they'll probably go a little more House of Torture than War Dogs. But, Shingo is going to get the winner of Fale and Bolton Oleg. If we get Shingo Takagi and Bolton Oleg, I'm very happy. Yeah, we're all winners in that one. Yeah. I see Shingo Takagi coming out of that group, though. I always do. I always think he's a guy that you can put in this tournament, have him do well. He doesn't have to win it, but he legitimizes whoever beats him in the Final Four or the finals. Just makes sense to me.
I'm with you on all of this. I think once Drilla wins that first match against Ishii, Shingo's whole mentality is I'm going to get to that guy again and I'm going to beat him.
Yeah.
And that kind of that story in the bottom left. I think Tetsuya Naito makes it to the quarterfinals. I think he beats Callum Newman. I think he beats Jeff Cobb. I don't think it'll be pretty, but I think that's what's going to end up happening. And I have gone back and forth in my head a number of times about the El Phantasmo, Great-O-Khan, Shota Umino triangle.
Yeah.
Up in this corner. And you and I talked about that match at New Beginnings and whether the teardown of Shota Umino was going to continue and he was going to lose, or if this was going to be the beginning of the great Shota comeback.
Yeah.
I think we're back to the great Shota comeback now. I think Great-O-Khan will probably end up beating El Phantasmo and then having this great big bout of confidence that he is just going to roll through Shota Umino all over again. And we're going to get a different guy. We're going to get a back to basics, shaved head, maybe a young lion kind of mentality, much like the way Naito rebuilt himself back all that time ago with the short hair and all that. And I think we're going to get the Naito Shota Umino little matchup to kind of mirror what Shota's going through right
now. The whole thing with Umino and Great-O-Khan is interesting because they were young lions at the same time. In fact, they had a young lion cup, and those two were two of the higher placed finishers in that thing. Ren Narita was in it too, for that matter. So when you hear things like Great-O-Khan say, I'm going to send you all the way back to your young lion days. Well, he was there for that. That's I remember exactly what that was like. Those were the guys that were doing the jobs in the first couple of matches of the show, Tomoaki Oka and Shota Umino. So it does have a little extra mustard on it when it comes from Great-O-Khan, just because they were, in fact, young lions together. I would almost like to see that, to see him just rebuild himself from there. But who knows? They could just come back with a completely new angry, pissed off image for him. That's always possible as well. So
I definitely think it's either Great-O-Khan or Shota Umino coming out of that quadrant, but I'm leaning Shota Umino. I think him rebuilding himself and getting to the finals and losing at the New Japan Cup would be a validation that he is on the right track, and he will be getting closer to his ultimate goal because it's just that kind of play I feel like they're going with.
And Great Okan beating El Fantasmo, that's not a bad idea for that TV title either.
Right.
You can do that. You can do that match eventually for the television title. So
I think Baron Corbin, Bishop Dyer, Tom Pestock, whatever his name is, probably the anniversary guy.
It'd be interesting if that's if
kick
they
the
do
wheels on
time.
Corbin.
That's fine. Yeah, that would be fine if they did it. So So anyway, some interesting things there. Like I said, Uemura and Sonata, of course, is an interesting first round match that we absolutely will get. So you got the guy that just ditched just 5 guys against the returning. So they're not teasing us with that one. We will see it on the 7th. So there are some of these matches that are indeed guaranteed. And
there's a lot of this in my mind that like they're making up for missed time with Yuya Uemura, and they're kind of putting him in these matches with these guys that they've been trying to get through, and now they can, and it kind of a cheat code. Like you could get the Sonata match done. You can get that. He can win against Sonata and lose against Finlay, and you can kind of give him that kind of arc to overcome going into the future. Especially if Finlay ends up being the champion, and Yuya Uemura can be one of those guys challenging him for the IWGP title down the line.
Only other thing to mention from that quadrant right there, El Fantasma and Jeff Cobb probably not done with one another because of the TV title thing as well. So remember, the Cobb launched who did he throw at the guy? Shomakato or something like that. Used him as a lawn dart to keep El Fantasma from getting in the ring and cause the double count out rather than lose.
Zane J over in San Jose.
Zane J. Yeah, pardon me. Yeah. I was saying Zane J. Just threw a guy at the other guy. So the Cobb and Phantasmo are not done with each other either. So that's
I'm a little worried about Jeff Cobb's success if he's doing another Crisis of Faith storyline in the background and all the backstage stuff. So
right,
he may end up on his bye not being a one and doneer, much like TJP, and that could also play into the United Empire. Who's the leader? Does anybody have their shit together? Kind of thing.
Yeah, and who do you think should come out of that? I almost feel like Okan is going to end up the leader of United Empire, and it probably.
I don't think there's going to be a United Empire.
You think they're just going to totally split up?
It's such a weird faction at this point.
Yeah, man. Like they've been utterly rudderless since. They tried to do that storyline with TJP being the captain and all that, so I don't think anyone really believes that.
I mean, I don't see TJP surviving against Drilla Maloney. I just don't. He not only is he rudderless, like there's no real storyline meat to anything that he's doing. Like it's almost arbitrary, this leader thing, because they have nothing else going on in the ring. Akira is off doing like single stuff, and there's a clear antagonistic aspect to even mentioning TJP in Akira's like presence. Like he doesn't need TJP's help, so that bodes well for faction unity.
I agree. War Hero saying Evil's winning his first 2. I kind of agree. I think he will too. And then on the other side, of course, that Shingo Takagi Drilla Maloney rematch is looming large to me. I think that's probably a good way to go. And Maloney can
Evil
beat Ishii and
Zack
TJP
Sabre Jr. on that side, or Evil and Ryohei Oiwa. Does Zack Sabre Jr. just automatically win all of his matches to stay strong?
I think Zack could absolutely come out of there just to make sure we get just to put over everyone. It would legitimize. Same thing Shingo Takagi can do on the other side. He can legitimize whoever does move on from it. It's just. What
if we got? I don't see Uemura versus Ren Narita on that side.
Here's what I don't see. I don't see Zack Sabre Jr. losing so quickly after losing the World Heavyweight title.
Right.
I don't think it's going to happen immediately. I think he might not win the cup. He might win the cup. Actually, you could do that. I mean, you could have a rematch. There's nothing wrong with that. I kind of doubt it that they'll do it, but you could do it. I don't think they're going to have him lose to Goto and then lose again right away. I just don't see them doing that.
I am. Zack Sabre Jr. and Ren Narita as a match seems very likely for the 15th. Like that is the one that I just keep coming back to over and over and over again. And I think you flip a coin 10 times and Ren Narita wins that match 5 times. That's how.
But with House of Torture, they have the gimmick. They can just always have foreign objects in the push-up bar and interference and whiskey in the face, and they can do 100 things that won't hurt the guy losing. It'll just be like, oh well, he got House of Tortured, and it doesn't hurt the guy standing if 6 people end up interfering because Red Shoes takes half of a bump and lays down for 20 minutes like he usually does.
Real talk here. Yes or no? Would you be okay if Shota Umino won this tournament?
Yeah, but I'm higher on Shota than a lot of people are. I do think that, but it might be a little bit early for that. I would not flip out. It might be a little bit early for him to win. I think that it's more about him showing what his new direction is and maybe getting to the precipice. But you could absolutely do that. He needs to win a couple of matches, though. I think he needs to win 1 or 2. I think he needs to make the semis here in order for this to be effective. I think he certainly needs to beat the winner of El Fantasma and Okan. Okay. I think unless he's just so bottomed out that he loses again to whoever, and this is not the unveiling of the new Shota Umino. It's more like the real actual young lion Shota Umino, and he can't beat anybody until one day he does. Like he's so young lion-y, he's even losing like he used to when he was a young lion. You could tell that story and then have him build it up later. But you got to get him moving toward the G1 eventually, right? And if he's basically a young lion, it becomes more difficult to put him in it. So he's going to have a resurgence at some point.
So let me ask you this. On the top left corner, Yota Tsuji, Evil, David Finlay, Yuya, Sonata, and Yoshihashi. Versus Goto, who's the one most likely to have a match at Sakura Genesis with Goto?
The most likely
of those 6 guys, which one would you say is most likely to have a match with Goto?
Boy, none of them look real. I mean, Finlay, I guess, but I don't think that's a story they're telling right now.
Bottom 6: Oiwa, Chase, Owen, Zack Sabre Jr., Gabe Kidd, Ren Narita, Taichi. Which one of those individuals is most likely to have a match with Goto at Sakura Genesis?
I would say at that point, you're looking possibly at a rematch with Zack.
Okay. Top right corner, of those 6 people, El Fantasma, Great-O-Khan, Shota Umino, Tetsuya Naito, Callum Newman, and Jeff Cobb. Which one of those individuals seems most likely to have a match with Goto at Sakura Genesis?
None of them seem likely to me at all. I don't think the winner's coming out of there for one heartbeat. I think the winner's coming out of the left side of this bracket. But, none of them really make much sense, either as a main event draw against him or a good match. Pardon me. There are people who have – El Fantasma would have a good – there were plenty of guys there that would have a good match with him. Cobb would have a good match with him. Fantasma would have a good match in it, but neither.
There's a lot of bridesmaids in that bracket.
There are. Yeah, I just don't see anybody coming out of that quadrant.
Bottom right, Tomohiro Ishii, Drilla Maloney, TJP, Bolton Oleg, Bad Luck Fale, or Shingo Takagi. Who's facing Goto?
Shingo. Not even a bad idea.
Not even a bad idea at all.
Not even a bad idea at all out of that one. Yeah.
So
I understand what you mean about Narita. I really do. And if he weren't where he is in this bracket on Evil's side, I would be more in favor of that. I feel like Evil's got to win a bunch to legitimize this whole thing. Narita can get to Zack, and maybe TMDK counters things enough that Zack is able to sneak by him, so to speak. They can do a thing where, Zack puts him in some impossible cradle where he can't escape for 3 seconds and squeak by while all the House of Torture chaos is going on. That's a story you could tell with Zack. I just feel like if Evil goes in there and loses to Finlay, then what was all that? There's a whole storyline going here where they're clearly trying to turn at least Gabe Kidd out of the War Dogs babyface. And so I just think that this is the beginning of that.
There are a number of irons in the fire between House of Torture and Bullet Club War Dogs.
Yeah.
The anniversary show is on March 6th, and then we have the start of the New Japan Cup the next night on the 7th with the Yota Tsuji Evil and Yuya Uemura Sonata matches headlining that show. I think there's a lot of irons in the fire with the Bullet Club and House of Torture. And if Evil is saying that the War Dogs are no longer Bullet Club, that kind of takes the whole Sakura Genesis being a Bullet Club heavy show and kind of transferring that energy over to House of Torture.
Right.
And maybe we're going to get a House of Torture War Dogs feud out of that. And there's a lot of busyness up at the top of the main event scene right now in the New Japan ecosphere.
I'm curious to see where Owens and Fale land in this. I really am, just like whose side they take. And the other end of it is, I am deeply, Jerry, I've been thinking about this the last week as I've had time. I am deeply suspicious of Taiji Ishimori here, who just kind of declared himself to be a war dog in a very Yoshinobu Kanemaru way of, oh, I'm just five guys. And then, poof, he's, when they get to it, he turns House of Torture. I can see House of Torture being the Japanese heel faction and War Dogs being the rugged foreign group. And I can see Ishimori turning his back on his on that or being a mole the whole time. You know what I mean? It's like he chose the House of Torture direction and became a mole within War Dogs for a brief period. I could see something like that happening.
It's super funny that you mentioned Taiji Ishimori not being completely honest. So at a personal request, Taiji Ishimori has withdrawn from Fantasticamania.
Yeah.
But he's going to be replaced by Bone Soldier Jr. for the remainder of the show.
So this is a masked wrestler, this Bone Soldier Jr. He's new. He's never been in New Japan before, but my God, what a set of abs on this guy. Where are you going to find anyone with a set of abs like Bone Soldier Jr. is showing off right now? So who knows?
Maybe his mirror idol, Taiji Ishimori, showed him how to do the crunches.
Not since LIJ went off into the forest and found the mythical Kamae Tachi has there been such a switcheroo in the last second.
Yeah, so I'm expecting some surprises in the New Japan Cup. I think Yota Tsuji and Gabe Kidd are both going to have early exits out of it because there's really no need for anything. Gabe Kidd's got his program with Ishii coming up.
Narita is not a bad challenger for the strong title either.
Absolutely not. That would happen at some point. You got Yota Tsuji and EVIL, like I said. Whatever happens, that global title will be in the mix some way, somehow. We may also end up having tag matches with Yota and Gabe tagging together. Like we may end up having directions like that where some of the House of Torture stuff is more
make some Odd Fellows tag teams and out of it.
Sure. So I think we're going to get a lot of craziness between House of Torture and the War Dogs and everything. But I also think it's kind of like sleight of hand, and there is other directions that they're going. But this is to kind of set some wheels in motion.
I feel like we'll have a better feel for this as we get closer to the tournament, and it's not terribly far away. I understand that there's only like a couple of weeks left, but I feel like we're going to have a better feel for this as we get closer. And of course, we'll continue to talk about it as it goes on. Yeah. But before all that, we have Fantasticamania coming up, and wanted to mention that 2 nights of the tournament have already of the tour have already happened. Tetsuya Naito is on this tour. He doesn't always do Fantasticamania. He's doing it this year. He does a lot, but they were in Osaka on the 19th, and they drew about 735. They were in Kagawa today, then drew 695. So, house show like numbers. And then this is interesting. They're back in Osaka on the 21st, and they were just in Osaka the other day, and then they're going back 2 different buildings, 2 different parts of town. It's funny, everybody knows how big Tokyo is. It's 40, like metropolitan Tokyo, however you want to define this, has around 40 to 45 million people in it, depending on how you want to define metropolitan Tokyo. People forget that Osaka has 20 million people in it. So they can absolutely run different parts of Osaka and still draw a little bit anyway. But they'll be back at Edion Arena, the building we're more familiar with them in, the prefectural gymnasium. So in the basement of the big arena where they just had the New Beginning. This is down the one that has like the basketball goals in the background, the house show bill, the part of Edion Arena. They'll be back there. Main event for this one is El Desperado, Templario, and Místico against Averno, Volador Jr., and Bone Soldier Jr., whoever on earth that is. Same main event in Aichi on Saturday. And they've also added in a mini tag team tournament. So that will conclude in Chiba. So all this is going to be on house shows. It won't be on NJPW World. Okamura is back, of course, and teaming with Satoshi Kojima. They are the MLW Tag Team Champions currently. And they're wrestling Ruhido and Magnus in Aichi. And the other semifinals of this tournament is Zelhua and Stigma against Bushi and Titan. The two winning teams will face each other in Chiba. The two losing teams will face each other in Chiba. So then they'll move on to Kyoto at the old KBS Hall, which is one of my favorite buildings to see. It's the one with the stained glass in the background. Looks pretty badass. And I mentioned Chiba on Wednesday, the 26th. But the next time we will see New Japan Pro Wrestling on NJPW World will be a week from today, February 27th, Thursday. That will be back at Korakuen Hall for 2 nights. So the Thursday and Friday next week, Korakuen Hall. And on the 27th, we will have an MLW Tag Team title match, Okamura and Kojima defending against Ruhido and Magnus, the team that they're facing in the first round in Aichi. So possible upset special in Aichi right there to establish the tag team challengers anyway. There will also be a Black Cat Memorial match at Korakuen Hall on the 27th. And that is, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Stigma, Mascara Dorada, and Mystico. So they're bringing up the heavy hitters on that one, taking on Bone Soldier Jr., Raider, Soberano Jr., and Averno. That is going to be the Black Cat Memorial match. We talked a little bit about Black Cat last year. Also see some special singles matches there. The Atlantis Jr. against Ultimo Guerrero, Templario and Volador Jr. And those shows at Korakuen Hall will be live in Japanese with English overdubbed later. I'd imagine Walker will probably be back for the Cup.
We'll get the videos, right?
And the maybe we will. And I'd imagine he'll be back for the Cup. He'll probably be back for the anniversary show, and hopefully Chris Charlton will as well. Although
it was confirmed he'll be back.
Okay, for the anniversary show. Yes. Good news.
That was mentioned at the end of the New Beginning in Japan English broadcast.
Main event for the 28th, Mystico versus Averno. That is for the MLW World Middleweight title. So MLW getting a lot of shine here in this one. And that's the main event in Korakuen Hall on the 28th.
Can I throw something at you that is absolutely insane?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you hear about the CMLL match that was made on March 21st with Master Dorada and Mystico?
Yeah, help me out with that. I did hear something about this. I don't have the details.
Mystico and Master Dorada from CMLL will be wrestling Commander and Hologram, who are Aramis from AAA.
Oh.
And they are Tony Khan managed to make this happen.
Wow.
Where these AAA wrestlers and the AEW representatives are wrestling at Arena Mexico.
Oh boy.
And a CMLL ring.
Do you think the officials of CMLL connected all those dots and know who's coming into their building?
I think everyone is well aware, and hell froze over everybody.
It did.
As much as you want to give Tony Khan shit about some of the ways he does business, he has done something here that a lot of other people have failed to do, which is build a bridge between AAA and CMLL.
That's crazy. That's very interesting that active AAA wrestlers going into Arena Mexico.
Yep.
It happens very, very rarely. I remember they did years and years ago now. It's wild. But they brought back Penta and who else? Oh, the La Parca and I'm trying to remember if Fenix was in there, but they brought them in when they weren't in CMLL and hadn't been for a few years. Simply because the upper half of the CMLL card had grown so stagnant that the wrestlers went to the front office and said, "You've got to give us somebody else to work with. Like there's just nothing left. We have done every combination and every way we can do. For the love of God, please bring these guys back so that we can have some fresh matches." And it lasted a few weeks, and it all went down in flames. So it was, and they were back to what they were doing. But that was the beginning of CMLL trying to get some new guys elevated on the cards as well, just to shake it up. But so this is, I'm not saying anything like that happened behind the scenes, but I think that might have been the last time CMLL let in somebody who had been quote unquote blacklisted from CNL back in the building. And it took basically a talent mutiny back then to do it. This time, maybe just a little more smooth talking.
I'm definitely impressed that this happened. And I give that guy, our contemporary in age and generational Tony Khan, a little bit of grief sometimes, but good job by you, buddy. That's impressive that you were able to broker that to happen, because if AEW doesn't exist, if Tony Khan doesn't exist, this deal doesn't exist.
It's a silly thing, too, to just have it be like, if you go over there, you can never, ever come back ever. It's
what kind of business is that?
Well, and how does it really help your company? You can pay, you're EMLL. You're a bigger company than AAA. And I'm not saying you can just pick and choose your talent and they'll just come running at any time. But are you seriously telling me that at CMLL, there is no advantage to you in bringing in Iho to Vikingo when he's healthy, if he's ever healthy again? But you know what I'm talking about? Like, if they come up with somebody who's just crazy talented, but no, just crossing your arms and saying no, how are you helping your own company with that? It's a silly stance. It's antiquated, and I'm hoping it's breaking down more than in the future.
The only two companies that really shouldn't be cooperating with each other is AEW and WWE. After that, whatever. Figure it all out, people. Are there any little news and notes that we need to cover that we haven't really...
Well, I was going to talk a little bit at the end about Gran Hamada.
Well, yeah, I mean,
if there are any other notes,
all that stuff, because it seemed like the natural segue that we're talking about all this Lucha Libre and CMLL and Japanese pro wrestling in the intersection. And now we could talk about a guy that was the bridge for all of that, Gran Hamada.
He passed away on February 15th. So just after Valentine's Day there, that was on Saturday, we found out. He is one of the original Young Lions. And I know that that's probably been in a lot of his bios that have to do with Japanese wrestling. But to give you an idea, as we know, New Japan began March 6th, 1972. And his debut was March 16th, 1972. He was one of the very, very first Young Lions, one of the very first people to debut. Not the first. That was Tatsumi Fujinami. He debuted on the first New Japan show right there. But he was on the very first show. But
that date is actually 10 years to the day of my brother's birthday.
Oh, wow. How about that? And his start came during their very first tour, the very first New Japan tour. And he mostly lost to Fujinami around the horn. Just basically every night he was in there losing to Tatsumi Fujinami, who, of course, we know Inoki quite rightly had his eye on as being a major star. Now, Fujinami was a junior heavyweight. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he was a little taller than Hamada was. And there was a different philosophy in Japanese wrestling back then. This was an era where junior heavyweights were not considered possible main event draws. You could have them there. They could have good matches, but you did not build your promotion around juniors in Japan at the time. You just didn't do it. So Fujinami was actually considered a small guy to main event, but his talent was just undeniable. He was, and like I mentioned, he was a little bit taller than some of the other juniors, and so you could pass him off as being more of a heavyweight, although he wrestled as a junior too. He did, but Fujinami was a bit of a different case for a lot of reasons. But this was before New Japan changed all of wrestling by bringing Satoru Sayama in as Tiger Mask. That wouldn't happen until 1981. And that he and Dynamite Kid totally changed the game. But this is 1972. And back then, they just thought this guy's just not big enough to be a big star. So he spent the next couple of years basically as a 500 wrestler. He would win some of his matches, lose some of his matches. He would have draws with some of the guys lower on the card. It wasn't unusual to have like a 15-minute draw in the first or second match of a show back then. And he was doing fine. He was working regularly. He was on almost all the tours and doing a lot, well over 100 matches a year and all that. But he wasn't moving up the cards in New Japan. He was kind of stuck in that spot. And you want to talk about the kiss of death. Remember when they called Chad Gable Shorty G? They called him Little Hamada. That's not a main event. Not a main event gimmick. Not a main event gimmick. But a very important moment came to him in 1975 when they allowed him to go over to Mexico and to go on essentially an excursion that ended up taking the rest of the 1970s. So in 1975, he went over to work for the UWA. Now we're used to AAA now. AAA started in the 1990s. And we're used to EMLL, and they used to be, CMLL, they used to be EMLL, but same company, just similar WWF, WWE, they changed the name. And those, we're used to those being the big promotions and things. And right now, CMLL is far above the rest. But in the 70s, this was a very competitive field. EMLL was still around, still running Friday nights at Arena Mexico, but UWA was a major company with major stars, and they would bring in Andre the Giant, was a guy that worked a lot for UWA. So they had the money to bring in some of the biggest names. Hamada ended up going there. That size didn't work against him in Mexico. In Mexico, you can be a smaller guy. You don't have to be 6 feet tall to be a star in Mexico. And certainly his talent and charisma shone through. He emoted well. He had an animated face. So then he took to Lucha Libre like a fish to water, understood it kind of intuitively. And, it was a different style. The arm drags are different. For instance, the bumps are different because, Lucha Libre was kind of built on being in boxing rings way back in the day, talking way, way back. So the way to work in Lucha is a lot of rolling bumps. If you watch things even today, fewer flat back bumps than you get in AEW or WWE, and more, the Tijeras, where you're kind of doing the rolling somersault type of bumps. And Hamada just got it. He just figured it out. Became a big star there and was a main event guy, to the point that they did not call him Little Hamada in Mexico. They called him Gran Hamada, which is great. Is a way to say great Hamada out there. So really took off in Mexico and was gone for years and years. Once that junior heavyweight revolution happened in Japan with Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid, and later we saw George Takano, the Cobra, Black Tiger, Mark Rollerball Rocco. Suddenly the junior heavyweights were guys who could be a draw on the show. Inoki and Fujinami, Kengo Kimura, and a bunch of others would be the heavyweights in the main event, but Tiger Mask might have been the biggest attraction they had going for a while, certainly the original Tiger Mask. And when he came back to Japan, he started working with those guys. And throughout the 80s, he eventually joined the UWF in 1984, which is something that the original Tiger Mask Sayama was involved in. And, that one was a bit of a tougher fit for him because it was a martial arts style that was supposed to look more like a shoot, and Lucha Libre doesn't really work as that as well. So that was a bit of an odd fit. But he could still work for everybody. He worked for All Japan. He worked for other companies in Japan. He would bring this Lucha Libre style over and mesh it with Japanese style junior heavyweight wrestling once that junior heavyweight fast-paced style took off in Japan. Once that got over, he could kind of marry the Lucha stuff to it and get over nicely in Japan. And he did that for many years, worked for a lot of different companies, tried to start his own called ULL, a Lucha Libre company in Japan. That didn't quite take off, didn't quite last. But he eventually was brought into New Japan again. You would see him pop up in the Super Junior tournaments once those began in earnest as an annual event. He was a guy that could go in and have a good match with anyone. He wasn't a New Japan regular all year round, so you didn't have to worry about pushing him too much. He could do jobs to the key guys, like Jushin Liger, like El Samurai, like at some cases Benoit, when Chris Benoit was one of the top guys, Black Tiger Eddie Guerrero. Gran Hamada could come in, wrestle those guys really well, put them over in the end so that the New Japan regulars could be at the top of the tournament. And just had a long career, a career that really went on really throughout the rest of the 20th century. Late 90s is really when he began to trail off, but he continued on for a while. Had two daughters who also wrestled. And were stars in both Mexico and Japan. Sochi was one of them, and I believe Ioga was his other daughter. But two women that worked in both Mexico and for All Japan Women. So he left a legacy in that department, kind of a family tradition there. And Gran Hamada just recently passed away at the age of 74 over Valentine's Day weekend.
I feel like that'd be young still. I'm getting older, and 74 just
doesn't sound
like,
as
you got to make it to 80. I feel like 80 feels like a full life at this point, and then we get to 80, I'm like, hope 90 is still a full life.
Yeah, but he was different. Those things like All Japan would hire Mil Mascaras and Dos Caras, who are luchadors for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Mascaras famous for his dives and things like that. But they were heavyweights, and they were not small. I mean, Mascaras was a bodybuilder, and Hamada just looked different, a little faster pace, a little more tumbling and things. And it was a style that rubbed off on a lot of the Japanese who just saw, oh, well, we can fit this in. So he added something, I think, to junior heavyweight Japanese style wrestling by bringing in some of that lucha and popularizing it because they hadn't seen it at that level.
Literally a trailblazer.
yeah, he really was. And just somebody who, there are a few of his matches that are uploaded now to NJPW World. They were on the front page recently uploaded, so you can go and see them. They're in the archives. One of them is particularly interesting. It was he teaming with Satoru Sayama before he was Tiger Mask. So if you want to see the original Tiger Mask before he put the hood on, that's on there, and a few other matches with Hamada. But you'll see he works differently than the other guys do, and it was something that just people hadn't really seen much of before. But now we see stuff like that all the time, and now we have Fantasticamania, and Fantasticamania would have been his thing. If he were in the different generation.
They should dedicate it to him this year.
It just happened. So I have a feeling we may see a Gran Hamada memorial match next year to go with the Black Cat thing too. So.
There's a couple of pay-per-views that popped up on New Japan World too. There's like a Jeff Crazy tournament.
Yes.
Jeff Crazy show.
Barb Sasaki, the referee, is having his 25th anniversary show. So that is, Barb doesn't work for New Japan, but he works a lot for Stardom.
Okay.
Marty Gold, his name is not Barb. They call him Barb because he did so many barbed wire matches. Yes, he did so many barbed wire death matches and things. So there is an entire pay-per-view now. Yeah, it's on track. There's an entire pay-per-view dedicated to Barb Sasaki's 25th anniversary in wrestling, and then New Japan World's going to distribute it. I'm not sure if there's going to be a lot of New Japan talent or Bushi Road talent on it, but that's who's distributing his pay-per-view. There might be some.
It took a while for the Desperado show to end up being free, so if you want to see it, you're probably going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, as we get closer to it, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's...
like the 10th, March 10th, I believe.
March 10th, yeah.
I was scanning through, you go to World just to see what's on there, just to make sure you're not missing anything.
Yes.
I watched the cinematic Wrestle Kingdom documentary that they put on there. That was
tell me about that. That I have not watched.
It was 75 minutes of HD content, filmed around the ring, like the matches. They took clips from the matches, extended clips, and cut it in with narrative. You can find it on YouTube without the subtitles, but if you have World, you can watch it with the subtitles. And they started with Yota Tsuji and the David Finlay match, and a lot of emphasis on Yota Tsuji in that one. Just, the way he's gone about his year. And, if he loses here in his first singles match at the Dome, he's going to have to question a lot. And then he won. Then they focused on Finlay for a little bit. Same kind of thing. He's been having a massive year. Then they would cut the cinematic aspects of the matches together. And then they revisited Yota Tsuji with Jack Perry right afterwards. So they tried to cover, the Yota Tsuji arc. And then they kind of did something similar with the junior heavyweight tag titles. Then they pivoted over to talking to Ryohei Oiwa about that, the four-way that he had for the TV title with Phantasmo and Cobb and Ren Narita. Then it got into Shota Umino, and they spent a lot of time with Shota Umino and Zack Sabre Jr., and it gave you a lot of context of what Shota Umino was going through and his whole dialogue. But a lot of what I was watching it, Steven, made me very, very cognizant of what it must have been like for you to be there, because the way that they filmed it, you got that sense of how the fans, because an HD camera with the cinematic HD camera captures the audience a lot better, and it just feels more real than kind of the HD that they do for their regular broadcast, which is clear, but it's not like 4K or 8K or or any of the like super pristine imagery. So the whole thing was very good, setting up what their Wrestle Kingdom dynamics were and what was going to be happening afterwards. And I thought for 75 minutes, it was a good use of the time educationally. And it's not for everybody, but if you really want to do the deep dive on New Japan, one of the things you should check out.
I have some more information on the Barb Sasaki show if you're interested in it. And probably should be there. This is an interesting lineup he's got. He's got a lot of people.
Your dog has more information about it too.
He's been talking it up. He just shouted it in my ear as to who's going to be on this show. But the main event is apparently there is indeed both New Japan and Stardom wrestlers on the show, and other promotions too. I'll go over some of them. The main events, plural, are going to be let's see, we have Rina Yamashita again as independent wrestler, an independent Joshi, against Suzu Suzuki. And Suzu Suzuki is a nut job who loves the deathmatch stuff, so that'll be probably pretty bloody. And it's a no rules, no DQ, no rules TLC match between Suzu and Rina. So they'll be passing out some headaches. But how about this one? We have Masahi Takeda versus El Desperado.
Of course, I was waiting for El Desperado's name in there somewhere.
Versus who do you think might be the other person in a El Desperado match on a deathmatch show, Jeremy?
Hiromu?
Jun Kasai.
He was the second guy on there, but
this is going to be an extreme three-way death match, fluorescent light and glass. Jun Kasai versus El Desperado versus Masahi Takeda.
As long as he gets through the Akira match first, New Japan doesn't care.
Yeah, very true. There will be guys from Freedoms, BJW, I think it's Big Japan, Independence, Who else? Oh, Mayu Iwatani is going to be on there from Stardom.
Oh, she's healthy again? That's good.
Yeah, Daisuke Sasaki from DDT, Starlight Kid from Stardom, Violent Jack from Freedoms, 2AW, Daishu Wakamatsu, and Takashi Sasaki from Freedom. So a collection of guys from Big Japan, DDT, 666.
A motley crew is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to throw the mat out after this one. I don't think there's any getting this one cleaned out. So once this was done, just chuck it in the trash.
Before and after the show.
Whew, boy! When I was there in Tokyo
about a deathmatch show, it was just getting happened. Honestly, I don't want any part of that.
I was talking to a guy who had gone to the Big Japan New Year's Eve show or something like that when I was over there, and I said, "Geez, what was that thing like?" And he said, "Oh, it was great. I had second row seats, and I was cleaning glass off my arm afterward." Oh, that sounds wonderful.
No.
Sounds wonderful.
I guess you're living monks, but you're shortening your own lifespan.
One time when I was a manager on the very low levels of independent wrestling in Kentucky and Indiana, I got thrown into a ring after someone had smashed fluorescent light tubes. And 2 days later, I was taking a shower and I felt a pain in my arm and realized it was still a little sliver of that fluorescent light glass in my arm. It was terribly unpleasant. I don't know why people do this to themselves.
Did you question all of your life choices up to that point?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you better believe it. I'm like, what exactly am I doing here? I should go into podcasting. I should invent podcasting so I can go into it. There weren't podcasts.
I will tell you this. I am not at a point currently where I'm questioning any of my life choices doing a podcast with you. So we have upgraded our decision making over the course of life. And with that, we should probably wrap this up.
I know
what a rail of
I know I would much rather be hanging out with you here and with Colin and War Hero and Fernando Zayas and the rest of the gang than rolling around in fluorescent light tubes. Not all of us are Jun Kasai and El Desperado. So what can you say?
My thrill for life manifests in many different ways, but not in a thirst for death.
Well, we digressed a lot. We talked about our pasts here.
We've had 90 minutes when there was no wrestling to talk about.
No, but I think we had an interesting conversation about our early love for wrestling and things. So I appreciate everybody indulging us on that.
I call this comic shop talk, which is essentially when you just talk about anything that comes up: the coffee shop talk, the comic shop talk, the shop talk. You just come in and we just bullshit for 90 minutes, and I just kind of end up what happened this week because we had some New Japan Cup. We had some Fantasticamania. But honestly, there was not a whole lot to talk about.
We will have more next week, though, because Fantasticamania will continue throughout the week. So we'll talk about what happened on the house shows. And then by the time we get back here, there will be the first of those 2 Korakuen Hall shows up on NJPW World. We can check those out, talk about what we see as the stars of CMLL invade Japan. And we always love that tour.
It's going to be fantastic, man.
And then, of course, I'm sure we'll have more information, more news, more thoughts on the New Japan Cup and everything else that's coming up. Things are going to pick up here. I think this is the last of our quiet weeks. After this, it gets a little busier.
You've definitely given me something to think about in terms of what I'm picking for the New Japan Cup. So thank you, and F you as well.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll hang it up here. Thank you for everyone who joined us live on YouTube. Thanks to everyone who listens to this later as a podcast. We appreciate your time. For Jeremy Finestone, I'm Stephen Conway. This has been Speaking of Strong Style, and we will talk to you all again real soon.